It was a quiet afternoon when Abina went to her home. The home felt strange, too quiet. She called out, but no one answered. Then she noticed the guest room door was partly open. Curious, she walked closer and looked inside. What she saw left her frozen. Her husband, Kofi, was standing with her mother, Clara. They both looked shocked to see her. Abina's heart raced. She asked, "What's going on?" But neither of them spoke at first. When Clara finally explained, the truth was something Abina never expected. It was a moment that would change everything. Once upon a time, in a bustling village nestled beneath the golden African sun, there lived a young man named Kofi. Known for his charm and hard work, Kofi was the kind of person everyone admired. He had a bright smile, a strong sense of duty, and above all a deep love for his wife Abina. Together, they were the picture of a perfect couple, respected and adored by all who knew them. Abina was the kind of woman whose beauty was only rivaled by her kindness. She had a gentle spirit and an unwavering trust in Kofi, believing they were destined to share a life of happiness. The village often spoke of their love as something timeless, like the stories told around the fire at night. But there was another presence in their lives, one that would change everything. Abina's mother, Clara. Clara was strikingly elegant for her age, carrying herself with a confidence that turned heads. She had a sharp tongue and a magnetic charm that could disarm anyone. As Abina's mother, she was deeply involved in their lives, often offering unsolicited advice on everything from cooking to marriage. What seemed like harmless interference at first soon took a darker turn. Beneath the surface of familial bonds, a forbidden connection began to form. Kofi found himself inexplicably drawn to Clara's allure, a pull so strong it began to cloud his judgment. Little did Abina know that the two people she trusted most were weaving a web of betrayal that would shatter her world. The whispers in the village, the fleeting glances, and the sudden tension in her home were all signs of a secret too explosive to stay hidden for long. This is the story of how love turned to betrayal, how trust was broken in the cruelest way, and how one woman's discovery changed everything. Stay tuned, because what happened next will leave you speechless. The couple had met at one of the village festivals years earlier. Kofi, shy but intrigued, had approached Abina with a clumsily prepared bouquet of wildflowers. She had laughed, not at the flowers, but at his awkward attempt to impress her. That moment was the beginning of a love that would later be celebrated with a grand wedding, attended by nearly every villager. Their marriage was not without challenges, but they weathered each storm together. When Kofi's crops failed one year due to a harsh drought, it was Abina who stood by him, encouraging him to try again. When Abina lost her first pregnancy, it was Kofi who held her through the tears, promising they would one day have a family of their own. Into this idyllic life stepped Clara, Abina's mother. A widow for many years, Clara often visited the couple, offering advice and stories from her own experiences. At first, her presence was a comfort. She helped Abina with the household chores, shared old family recipes, and became a frequent guest at their dinner table. Clara had a commanding presence that made her hard to ignore. Her wit and sharp sense of humor often left everyone in stitches. But beneath her charming exterior was a woman who enjoyed being the center of attention. Whether intentionally or not, Clara had a way of drawing people into her orbit, including Kofi. For Abina, her mother's frequent visits were nothing unusual. After all, family ties were deeply valued in the village. She trusted both her husband and her mother implicitly, never imagining that their relationship could evolve into something more than familial respect. As the months turned into years, the couple's bond remained strong, or so it seemed. Kofi and Abina continued to share their dreams of a brighter future. A bigger farm, children playing in the yard, and a long happy life together. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. Kofi started spending more time at home when Clara was around. At first, it seemed innocent enough, helping her with heavy bags or engaging in casual conversations about village gossip. Abina, often preoccupied with her duties, noticed nothing out of the ordinary. To her, Kofi's attentiveness toward her mother was just a sign of his good nature. But a dangerous spark was beginning to ignite. Kofi couldn't quite explain it, but Clara's confidence and energy captivated him in ways he didn't understand, or perhaps didn't want to admit. And Clara? She wasn't entirely oblivious. Her playful teasing and lingering glances hinted at something more, though she hid it well behind a facade of motherly affection. The perfect marriage was beginning to show its cracks, though no one, not even Abina, could see them yet. What seemed like a picture-perfect love story was quietly unraveling, one moment of misplaced trust at a time. Little did they know, the storm brewing beneath the surface was about to explode in ways none of them could have foreseen. In every relationship, subtle changes often go unnoticed, until it's too late. For Kofi and Abina, those changes began as faint ripples, barely perceptible in the flow of their daily lives. But as time went on, those ripples became waves. Clara, Abina's mother, had become a permanent fixture in their home. What started as occasional visits to help her daughter soon turned into extended stays. Clara claimed her presence was to support Abina, but in truth, her charm and magnetic personality began to command more attention. She wasn't just a mother-in-law. She was a force of nature, confident and captivating in a way that drew people to her effortlessly. Kofi found himself drawn to Clara in ways he couldn't explain. At first, it was harmless admiration. Clara had a confidence Abina didn't. She carried herself with grace, always knowing what to say and when to say it. While Abina's love was nurturing and steady, Clara's presence was exhilarating, like a gust of wind stirring a stagnant afternoon. Kofi often caught himself smiling at her jokes, seeking her advice, or simply watching her with curiosity he tried to suppress. Kofi found himself drawn to Clara in ways he couldn't explain. At first, it was harmless admiration. Clara had confidence Abina didn't. She carried herself with grace, always knowing what to say and when to say it. While Abina's love was nurturing and steady, Clara's presence was exhilarating, like a gust of wind stirring a stagnant afternoon. Kofi often caught himself smiling at her jokes, seeking her advice, or simply watching her with curiosity he tried to suppress. Clara, for her part, wasn't blind to Kofi's growing interest. She noticed the way his gaze lingered a moment too long, or how he laughed just a little louder at her stories than anyone else's. At first, she dismissed it as harmless. After all, what man wouldn't appreciate her vivacious personality? But as time went on, Clara began to enjoy the attention. She started dressing more elegantly when visiting Kofi and Abina, choosing clothes that accentuated her beauty. Her conversations with Kofi became more personal, peppered with subtle compliments and inside jokes that excluded Abina. Abina, caught up in the daily grind of managing their home, failed to see the subtle shifts in the dynamics of her household. She trusted her husband and her mother implicitly. To her, Kofi's attentiveness to Clara was nothing more than an extension of his love for her. After all, wasn't it a sign of a good husband to treat his in-laws with respect and care? But beneath this facade of normalcy, tension was building. Moments that should have been innocent became charged with unspoken emotions. One afternoon, while Abina was at the market, Clara and Kofi found themselves alone in the kitchen. What began as casual banter turned into a deeper conversation about life, love, and regrets. Clara shared stories of her younger days, and Kofi listened intently, captivated by her vulnerability and strength. It was in these quiet, stolen moments that the line between right and wrong began to blur. Kofi knew his feelings for Clara were inappropriate, but he couldn't stop himself. She was intoxicating, a mixture of wisdom and playfulness that made him feel both comforted and alive. Clara, too, wrestled with her emotions. She knew the bond she was forming with Kofi was dangerous, but she couldn't deny the thrill it brought her. For a woman who had spent years as a widow, this newfound attention awakened feelings she thought were long gone. The villagers began to notice the changes before Abina did. Whispers of Clara's frequent visits and Kofi's unusual attentiveness started circulating. "Isn't it strange how Clara always seems to be at Kofi's house?" one neighbor muttered to another. "And have you seen the way he looks at her?" Still, no one dared to voice these concerns to Abina. She was blissfully unaware, caught in the web of her daily routines. The spark between Kofi and Clara was growing into a flame, and neither of them seemed willing or able to extinguish it. What had once been a relationship built on trust and respect was now teetering on the edge of betrayal. And for Abina, the storm clouds gathering over her perfect marriage were still invisible. But soon the lightning would strike, and nothing would ever be the same again. The truth has a way of seeping through even the strongest walls of secrecy. Kofi and Clara's growing connection, once hidden behind carefully chosen words and stolen glances, was now turning into something undeniable. The line they promised themselves they'd never cross had become blurry, and every encounter seemed to push them closer to the edge. It was a quiet evening when the line was finally crossed. The night was still, save for the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Abina had retired early, exhausted from a long day at the market. Kofi and Clara sat outside under the vast, starry sky, talking as they often did when Abina wasn't around. Their conversation started innocently, as it always did. Clara spoke of her late husband, and Kofi listened with a mix of sympathy and curiosity. "He was a good man," Clara said, her voice tinged with sadness. "But sometimes I wonder if I ever truly knew what love was." Kofi, emboldened by the intimacy of the moment, asked, "Do you think you could ever feel it again?" Clara's eyes met his, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. "Maybe," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But love has a way of finding you when you least expect it." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words. Before either of them could think, their hands touched. A fleeting moment that lingered far too long. That single act shattered the illusion they had clung to, that their feelings could be contained. What began as a moment of weakness quickly spiraled into something they couldn't undo. In the weeks that followed, their connection deepened, fueled by secrecy and the thrill of the forbidden. They found ways to steal moments alone, whether it was under the guise of running errands or lingering in the kitchen after dinner. Abina, still blissfully unaware, began to notice subtle changes in her home. Kofi seemed distracted, often lost in thought. Clara, once a pillar of strength and wisdom, now seemed unusually radiant, her mood lighter than it had been in years. But Abina chalked it up to nothing more than the ebb and flow of life. The village, however, was less forgiving. Whispers grew louder as neighbors pieced together the puzzle. They noticed the way Kofi's gaze lingered on Clara during community gatherings, how Clara seemed to spend more time at his house than was appropriate. "It's not normal," one elder muttered to another. "A man should respect his wife, not whatever this is." For Kofi and Clara, the weight of their actions was beginning to take a toll. The secrecy that once excited them now felt suffocating. They were constantly looking over their shoulders, terrified of being caught. And yet they couldn't stop. One fateful day, Abina returned home earlier than expected. She had forgotten her shopping list and decided to turn back. As she approached the house, She heard hushed voices and laughter coming from inside. Curious, she tiptoed to the window and peered in. What she saw stopped her heart. Kofi and her mother were sitting close, their heads nearly touching as they shared a private moment. Abina couldn't hear their words, but the intimacy between them was unmistakable. She froze, unsure of what to do. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one more painful than the last. Was she imagining things? Was this some kind of misunderstanding? But deep down she knew the truth. Abina didn't confront them that day. Instead, she began to watch more closely, piecing together the fragments of betrayal. She noticed how Clara always seemed to find excuses to be near Kofi, how Kofi's demeanor changed whenever her mother was around. The signs were all there, glaring and undeniable. Her world crumbled as she wrestled with the reality of what was happening. The people she loved and trusted most had betrayed her in the worst possible way. In her pain, Abina turned to an old friend, Ajoa, for solace. Ajoa was one of the few people Abina trusted implicitly. She listened patiently as Abina poured out her suspicions, her voice breaking with every word. Ajoa's face darkened with anger as she listened. "You need to confront them," she said firmly. "This isn't something you can ignore. If you don't, it will destroy you." Abina nodded, her resolve hardening. She knew Ajoa was right. But how does one confront a betrayal so deep, so personal? That night, Abina lay awake staring at the ceiling. She thought about her marriage, her mother, and the life she had worked so hard to build. Her heart ached with the weight of it all. But she also felt a flicker of strength, a determination to uncover the full truth and reclaim her life. As the first rays of dawn broke through the window, Abina made a decision. She would no longer be a silent observer in her own story. The storm she had tried to ignore was now raging, and it was time to face it head-on. What Abina didn't know was that her confrontation would uncover more secrets than she ever imagined, shaking the very foundations of her life and the lives of those around her. The stage was set, and the truth was about to come crashing down like a tidal wave. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same again. The morning sun cast an unassuming glow over the village, but within Abina's home, the atmosphere was anything but serene. For days she had watched and waited, each passing hour intensifying the turmoil within her. Her decision to confront Kofi and Clara burned in her chest like an unrelenting flame. Today was the day. Abina's plan was simple. She would ask Kofi to sit with her in the courtyard, as they often did during calm evenings, and her mother would naturally join them. She would then address the issue, no preamble, no escape routes. But even the best laid plans are vulnerable to the chaos of human emotions. As the afternoon approached, Abina found herself alone with Clara in the kitchen. Her mother hummed a tune, her hands deftly peeling cassava. Abina watched her, a mix of rage and heartbreak churning in her gut. How could someone so familiar suddenly seem like a stranger? "Ma," Abina began cautiously, her voice steady but tense, "I've been meaning to ask you something." Clara didn't pause her task. What is it, my dear?" Abina hesitated, her heart pounding. She thought of the night she had spent crying in silence, the betrayal she had pieced together like a cruel puzzle. But before she could speak, the door creaked open and Kofi walked in, breaking the moment. He stopped short when he saw them together. Something unspoken passed between the three of them, a tension that hung in the air like a thundercloud. Clara quickly turned back to her cassava, her movements a little too deliberate. Kofi, on the other hand, lingered by the door, avoiding Abina's gaze. That was it. The final confirmation Abina needed. She set down her knife and wiped her hands, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Let's all sit down," she said firmly, her voice leaving no room for argument. Kofi looked like he wanted to protest, but Clara, sensing the gravity of the moment, nodded. They moved to the courtyard, the air between them thick with anticipation. For a moment no one spoke. Abina sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the ground. Clara fidgeted with the hem of her wrapper, while Kofi stared at the horizon as if searching for an escape. Finally, Abina broke the silence. "I want to know the truth," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "I've seen how you two look at each other. I've heard the whispers in the village. I've felt the distance growing between us. So tell me, what is going on?" Her words hung in the air, a challenge neither Kofi nor Clara seemed ready to face. Kofi opened his mouth to speak but quickly closed it, his eyes darting nervously to Clara. Clara, uncharacteristically silent, looked away, her face a mixture of guilt and defiance. "Say something." Abina's voice cracked, the pain she had bottled up for weeks spilling over. "I deserve the truth." Clara sighed, her shoulders sagging under the weight of the confrontation. "Abina, it's not what you think," she began, but the hesitation in her voice betrayed her. "Don't lie to me," Abina snapped, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare lie to me, Ma. I'm not a fool." Kofi finally found his voice. "Abina, please. Don't you please me." She cut him off, her anger boiling over. "You've been avoiding me, lying to me, betraying me in the worst possible way. Do you even care about what this is doing to me?" Kofi looked down, unable to meet her eyes. Clara, too, seemed to shrink under Abina's fiery gaze. "Abina, I made a mistake," Kofi said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for it to happen. Just did." Abina's heart shattered at his words. "It just did," she echoed, her voice laced with disbelief. "You're my husband and she's my mother. How could you let this happen? How could you betray me like this?" Clara finally spoke, her voice steady but filled with regret. "Abina, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. Stop," Abina interrupted, holding up her hand. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice remained firm. "I don't want your apologies. I want to understand how the two people I trusted most in this world could do this to me." The silence that followed was deafening. Kofi and Clara exchanged a glance, but neither seemed to know how to answer her question. "Was it worth it?" Abina asked, her voice breaking. "Was it worth destroying everything we had?" Neither of them replied. Abina stood up, her legs trembling but resolute. "I can't do this," she said, her voice barely audible. "I need time to think." She turned and walked away, leaving Kofi and Clara sitting in the courtyard, their faces pale and stricken. In the days that followed, Abina grappled with the aftermath of their confession. She couldn't bring herself to speak to either of them, retreating into a shell of pain and anger. The once warm home she had built with Kofi now felt cold and alien, every corner a reminder of the betrayal she had endured. The village, meanwhile, buzzed with rumors. News of the confrontation had spread like wildfire, and everyone seemed to have an opinion. Some blamed Kofi, calling him weak and unfaithful. Others pointed fingers at Clara, accusing her of overstepping her boundaries as a mother. Through it all, Abina remained silent, refusing to dignify the gossip with a response. Her focus was on rebuilding her life, piece by piece, away from the wreckage of her marriage and the shadow of her mother's betrayal. But the scars left by their actions were deep, and the road to healing was long. Abina knew she would never forget what had happened, but she vowed to rise above it, stronger and wiser than before. And as for Kofi and Clara, they were left to grapple with the consequences of their choices, their once secret relationship now a public scandal. Their actions had not only destroyed Abina's trust, but had also shattered the fragile bonds that held their family together. In the end, the truth had come to light, and the price of their betrayal was clear. They had not only lost Abina but had also lost themselves in the process. And for that, there was no redemption. Time moved slowly for Abina after the revelations, each day a struggle to reclaim a sense of normalcy in the face of unimaginable betrayal. The once familiar rhythms of her life felt foreign, overshadowed by the pain of broken trust. Yet, in her quiet moments of reflection, she realized she had a choice. She could let this betrayal define her, or she could rise above it. Her first step toward healing was leaving the home she once shared with Kofi. It was a painful decision, but staying there, surrounded by memories tainted with lies, was too much to bear. She moved in with a childhood friend, Amma, who offered her a safe space to grieve and rebuild. Amma, ever the voice of reason, encouraged Abina to seek solace in the simple joys of life. "You need to remind yourself of who you are," Amma said one evening as they prepared dinner. "This pain doesn't define you. You're stronger than this." Taking her friend's advice to heart, Abina immersed herself in the vibrant life of the village. She started volunteering at the local school, sharing stories with children who hung on her every word. Their laughter and wide-eyed wonder reminded her of the magic in storytelling, a gift she had almost forgotten amidst the chaos of her personal life. Meanwhile, Kofi and Clara faced the harsh judgment of the community. Once respected figures in the village, they now carried the heavy burden of shame. The villagers whispered about them in hushed tones, their disdain evident in every sidelong glance and curt greeting. Kofi made several attempts to reach out to Abina, his messages filled with regret and pleas for forgiveness. But Abina couldn't bring herself to respond. She needed distance not just from him, but from the weight of their shared past. Clara too tried to mend fences, visiting Abina unannounced one afternoon. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But I want you to know I am truly sorry for everything I've done." Abina listened in silence, her emotions a turbulent mix of anger and sadness. "Ma," she finally said, her voice firm but calm, "I'm not ready to forgive you. I don't know if I ever will. But I need to heal on my own." Her words, though painful, marked a turning point. They were not just a rejection of Clara's apology, but a declaration of her intent to reclaim her life. Over time, Abina began to find strength in herself she didn't know she had. She reconnected with old friends, pursued her passion for storytelling, and even started dreaming of traveling beyond the village to share her tales with others. Though the wounds of betrayal would always be a part of her, they no longer defined her. Abina was determined to write her own story, one of resilience, renewal, and unshakable self-worth. And as she stood in the bustling marketplace one sunny afternoon, surrounded by the vibrant colors and lively chatter of her community, she felt a spark of hope. For the first time in months, she believed that brighter days were ahead. Months passed, and the pain of betrayal began to fade, replaced by a quiet determination within Abina. She had started to rebuild her life piece by piece, focusing on herself and the future she deserved. The village children became her source of joy. She began teaching them traditional folktales, her voice breathing life into the stories passed down through generations. Their laughter and eager questions reignited a spark within her, reminding her of the strength she had to carry forward. Kofi and Clara remained distant figures in her life. Though the scars of their actions ran deep, Abina chose not to let bitterness consume her. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't for them. It was for her own peace. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and gold, Abina stood by the riverbank. The reflection of the shimmering water seemed to mirror her newfound strength. "I am more than what happened to me," she whispered to herself. In that moment, she felt the weight of her past lift, making room for the promise of brighter tomorrows. Abina was ready to embrace her new beginning, one step at a time. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more tales like this. And make sure to watch our next video. It's one you won't want to miss.